Hi, thanks for joining me again for another episode of the Electric Bison. First time I think the word greaser that I know of was used here in Montana was back in January of 1864, just a short time before Montana Territory became a reality. We were still part of Idaho Territory, but over in Bannock, the vigilantes, which were self-appointed people, kind of like right-wing death squad that felt self-righteous about going around hanging other people without a trial. They had just got done hanging the sheriff and two of his associates. The next day, they decided they want to go to make inquiries with a guy named Jose Pizantia, a Mexican, and they called him the Greaser. So they're going to go up there and they're going to ask him if he'd done anything wrong, which indicates to me that they were pretty high on firewater, or what they called firewater when it went to the Native Americans, and it was 40 rod when it was drank by the non-Indians. 40 rod because you could get drunk on it, they thought, from 660 feet away. Anyhow, they were going to go up and inquire with Pizantia to see if he had done anything wrong. And Jose Pizantia had different ideas, and so he holed up in his cabin and he shot at these guys, killed one of them and wounded another one, which really infuriated this crowd. So they went in under the soon-to-be governor's bed, got a cannon out, put it on a box from 25 meters away, 25 rods away, and fired 3 rounds into Pizantia's cabin, and including one through their chimney in case he was hiding in there. And then when they went in there, they found him badly injured under a door. So the guy that had been shot in that first attack, he pulled Pizantia out and shot him full of holes. And then they took his body out and they hung it from a pole. And then everybody proceeded to shoot holes in the Mexican 100 times. And about the time that got over with, another one of the vigilantes came up from Pizantia's cabin and had set it on fire. And so they took the Mexican man's body down and threw it on the fire until he was burned to nothing. And they called him the Greaser during that event. So it was a big thing up here in Montana. It was contemptuous, it was hostile, it was racist, it was shameful. But it was used a lot the word was used a lot during the Mexican War. So if a reporter from the New Orleans Picayune wrote home, he'd write home about, to the States about Mexicans being lashed for trying to kill American soldiers, and he would call them greasers. So it's something that became a thing down between us and the Mexicans during the war with Mexico. And it didn't come necessarily from the upper class Mexicans condemning mestizo or Mexicans with Indian blood, lower class Mexicans for being rude or gross. There's a word that could have evolved into greaser, but it came probably from the fact that the Mexican laborers would grease their shoulders to carry beef sides off of the ships at the harbor at the mouth of the Rio Grande when they were bringing in supplies, or the Mexican rancheros that were out always watching the American troops on their horses would get greasy stains on their shafts by riding through the brush that was down along the Rio Grande. And it's just a name that kind of came probably from several places, but it really stuck, and it came about and was used a lot during our war with Mexico. And of course, in any war, when you dehumanize the opponent, it's a lot easier to kill a greaser than it is a human being, which is really a tragedy. Gringo, on the other hand, probably started in Spain back in the 1700s when people would try to speak Spanish with a heavy accent, and the native speakers were trying to understand them like they tried to. Apparently, this happened a lot in Malaga, I was in Malaga, and I remember trying to carry on a conversation with a cop there in the Malaga police station, and we had a great time. I mean, it took a long time, and he must thought I was wonderful because I ended up having to referee an argument between a taxi cab driver and a couple of American tourists. But anyhow, the word griega for Greek means it's Greek to me. It's like if somebody tries to speak English and they can't, you'd say, well, it's kind of Greek to me. Well, that's where gringo probably started. But during the Mexican War, when American soldiers were marching from the Nueces River through that disputed territory down to the Rio Grande, they were singing a song that was made very popular then. It was called Gringo the Lilacs. And they were mostly, they were Irish soldiers for the most part, the immigrants. And it was a popular song in Ireland. So Greaser kind of came out of the ether. Gringo probably was there already and made more popular by Irishmen and their buddies singing Gringo the Lilacs. I would like to read a few statements that help create the context for what it was like in those years. It was during the height of the potato famine in Ireland, and in 1845, if you read Paddy's Lament, you find that there was a disaster by then. The famine had been going on for years, but in 1845-46, it was super bad. The disease had attacked growing plants without warning, destroyed almost half of them. People had suffered, but most had been saved by their long apprenticeship to scarcity and want, by salvaging what they could and making do. Near the end of July in 1846, the disease appeared again, this time not only in Cork, but in several places. The blight this time spread to every area in so short a time that a kind of wailing lament rose throughout the country wherever neighbors gathered. The crisis of 1846, that's when we marched our troops into Mexico, was of such magnitude that the British government had to act with all speed to save the lives of hundreds of thousands of its subjects. Evidence will show the response constitutes the blackest chapter in the history of Great Britain. During the winter of 1846-47 alone, while over 400,000 persons were dying of famine or famine-related disease, the British government allowed 17 million pounds sterling worth of grain, cattle, pigs, flour, eggs, and poultry to be shipped to England, enough food to feed, at least during these crucial winter months, twice the almost 6 million men, women, and children who composed the tenant farmer and farm labor population. That's from Paddy's Lament. And at the same time, it mentioned Cork, but Cork was where the British ships would put into the Cork Harbor to pick up new people for their new regiments coming to North America. And when I was up in the National Archives of Canada in Ottawa, I read across this statement in a Canadian history review. It said prevailing methods of enlistment were characterized by all manner of trickery and deception, as unscrupulous recruiting sergeants regaled agricultural laborers and to a lesser extent workers in the towns with promises of substantial cash bounties for enlisting. Many must have rued the day when penniless and unemployed at times of economic depression, inebriated or down on their luck, they had impulsively taken the king's shilling and signed away their civilian freedom without the hope of discharge before 21 years or more had elapsed, unless invalided out or dismissed in disgrace. At least some recruits deliberately joined regiments serving in or embarking for British North America with the premeditated intention of thereby reaching the United States. This recourse was especially exploited by Irishmen wanting to flee grinding poverty at home and join relatives or acquaintances in the United States. Quote, they all have relations or friends settled in the States, In the quote, complained Lieutenant Governor Arthur, quote, and what will bind an Irish soldier if he has the opportunity of seeing his cousin, end of quote. Yet the Irish were equally noted for absconding under a sudden impulse, particularly when intoxicated, and for wandering away from camp without a preconcerted plan or fixed destination. According to the Deputy Adjutant General of Montreal, writing in 1845, this heedless impetuosity contrasted strikingly with those Highlanders who had acquaintances across the border, for the capture or return of a Scotch deserter is very rare. His plan is well arranged and the assistance of his friends in the United States effectual. Nevertheless, voicing the prejudices of English Protestants or Scottish Presbyterians, commanding officers regularly blamed the Irish for the high rate of desertion. These renegades are not only Roman Catholics, but unruly men of notorious habits and mutinous disposition. That description of what the British officers were experiencing and having to constantly replenish their regiments in Canada really kind of describes what was going on in the American Army at the same time when they finally got down to Corpus Christi on the Nueces River. It really does, it's just the way it was. So, but the truth is that when they finally got orders on March 8th to start marching down to the Rio Grande across the disputed territory, as Ulysses Simpson Grant, first lieutenant in Corpus Christi, said on March 1846, we were sent to provoke a flight, but it was essential that Mexico should commence it, one of the most unjust ever waged by a stronger nation against a weaker. And then later on, after he'd been a general of the Union Army in the Civil War, and he wrote his memoirs, he said, a better army than General Zachary Taylor's, man for man, never faced an enemy. Now, I found it, I'm pretty sure that John Riley, the guy that started the San Patricios on the Mexican side, came across and was somehow associated with Mackinac Island up in Michigan. And the reason I say that is later on, after all the fighting was over with, and the story that I'll be telling, he wrote a letter to a guy named Thomas O'Malley at Fort Mackinac. And he wrote it in 1847, after all the problems he got himself into were behind him. He says, I have had, and this was in the archives, the U.S. archives of our national archives. It was there with his court-martial and the court-martial of many of the other deserters who fought on the side of the Mexicans. This letter is just sitting there. O'Malley sent it to General Scott. So it's there in the archives. And he said, quote, I have had the honor of fighting in all the battles that Mexico has had with the United States. I suppose from the accounts you have seen in the United States papers that you have been sure to form a sorry opinion of Mexico and its government. But be not deceived by the prejudice of a nation which is at war with Mexico. For a more hospitable and friendly people there exists not on the face of the earth. That is to a foreigner, and especially to an Irishman and a Catholic. As I am at present a prisoner of war by the Americans, it is impossible for me to state the facts as they are, but in my next letter I'll give you a full and true account of the war, as it has progressed no more at present. I forgot to tell you under what banner we fought so bravely. It was that glorious emblem of native rights, that banner which should have floated over our native soil many years ago. It was St. Patrick, the harp of Erin, the shamrock, upon a green field. Adios. John O'Reilly, Mexico City, October 27th, 1847, letter to Thomas O'Malley in Fort Mackinac. Then, to tie it together, I found up on Mackinac Island, I found a book about the wife of the chaplain who was assigned up there, and she had written a diary, and in that diary or in that book, she says in 1849, quote, "This morning a girl made her appearance in the shape of a thick-set, ignorant native, to the very manner born. Of your dear country, she came here to her brother Michael Morrison, who paid her passage from home, has only been in the country 5 months, and is greener than the greenest shamrock of dear old Ireland. However, I installed her forthwith at the rate she demanded, $6 per month. We may as well try this specimen, as it will save passage of another, and yet, if an intelligent Protestant girl should come in your way, I should not hesitate to hire her in preference. This girl is cousin to the O'Malleys." That's the people that Riley sent the letter to. "And darkens. I could never expect to keep her out of that set. And how long will they suffer her to remain with me? Probably just long enough for me to take all the trouble of teaching her. And then they'll coax her away or marry her to some 20th cousin. She does not look healthy, although large, and really seems about half-witted, though very ready and well able to clean and scrub about. Charlotte O'Brien to her husband, Chaplain John O'Brien, from Fort Mackinac, summer of 1849. So I thought it was interesting that O'Malley, when he got that letter, thought it his duty to send it to the powers that be in Washington. So he was working his way up in American society as an Irishman. I'm going to shut this off now and try to play the song Green Grow the Lilacs. It's a pretty catchy tune. Thanks.